At 2:17 a.m., security cameras flicker across Moscow's back streets. Doors splinter. Sirens never arrive. In Rostov, Novosibirsk, and towns east of the Urals, men in uniform enforce their own rules, while official patrol cars sit idle. Internal ministry data compiled through late 2025 shows a staggering collapse. Police vacancy rates above 40% nationwide, and soaring toward 90% in some districts. In practical terms, entire neighborhoods have no response unit on call. No backup, no authority. The numbers tell a brutal story. A starting police salary hovers near 40,000 rubles per month, roughly $400 at recent exchange rates, eroded by war-driven inflation. A military contract promises 5 times that amount. The result is cold arithmetic. Badges land in trash bins. Lockers are emptied. Stations fall silent. Preliminary Interior Ministry reports circulating by early 2026 confirm a historic personnel collapse that the Kremlin struggles to conceal. This vacuum reshapes the streets after sunset. Veterans return with trauma and weapons experience. Gangs test boundaries that no longer exist. In remote towns, emergency calls ring unanswered. The state's monopoly on force, once the core of Vladimir Putin's 25-year promise of stability, fractures in real time. City centers glow like set pieces, while side streets slip beyond control. Then the unthinkable happens. The system built to guarantee order becomes a source of fear. Professional standards are waived. Recruits arrive without vetting, and the regime that projects strength abroad discovers a dangerous truth at home. When police evaporate, power migrates to whoever carries the biggest stick. The question now gripping Russia is stark. Who rules the streets when the state steps back? And what follows when that retreat becomes permanent? To understand why this collapse matters, it is necessary to step back and look at the architecture of power inside Russia. For more than 2 decades, the Kremlin built a system often described as the vertical of power. At its base stood the police, the Interior Ministry's rank-and-file officers, present on every corner in every district, enforcing order through sheer visibility. Above them sat regional governors, security agencies, and finally, the presidency. The message was simple: stability in exchange for obedience. That bargain now looks broken. Russia today is fighting a grinding, resource-intensive war in Ukraine, entering its 4th year. According to reporting from Reuters and the BBC, through 2025, the conflict has consumed hundreds of billions of rubles, forced a war economy model, and redirected manpower toward the front. Strategic priorities shifted outward. Internal security became secondary. Police units, once dedicated to local patrols, were reassigned to occupied territories such as Mariupol and other frontline cities, creating gaps back home that were never filled. This is not just about numbers, it is about incentives. A police officer earning 40,000 rubles faces inflation, rising food prices, and public anger. A military contractor earns close to 200,000 rubles. Defense News and DW note that this wage gap widened sharply after 2023, turning recruitment into a zero-sum game. Every officer who signs an army contract is one less presence on the street. Every forced deployment convinces others to quit preemptively. History sharpens the contrast. In the early 2000s, Putin rose to power promising to end the chaos of the post-Soviet years. Crime fell, wages stabilized. The police became a symbol of restored authority. Today, that symbol is inverted. Where the state once looked omnipresent, it now appears selective, powerful abroad, brittle at home. The imbalance exposes a deeper weakness. Policing is about patience, restraint, and legitimacy. War is about destruction and speed. As Reuters analysts warn, substituting military logic for civilian law enforcement creates friction that societies rarely survive unscathed. Russia now sits at that intersection. A vast country with shrinking internal guardians, swelling external commitments, and a population that increasingly doubts whether the state can still protect everyday life. This is the context behind the images from Moscow's back streets. Not random disorder, not isolated incidents, but the predictable outcome of a system stretched beyond its limits, choosing tanks over patrol cars, trenches over neighborhoods, and projection of power over preservation of order. The unraveling did not happen overnight. It moved in waves. Each wave left less behind. First came quiet resignations. Veteran officers filed paperwork. No speeches, no protests. Interior Ministry memos reviewed by independent Russian outlets showed thousands leaving each quarter through 2024 and 2025, often citing family reasons or health concerns. On paper, the system still functioned. On the ground, patrol schedules thinned. Response time stretched from minutes to hours.
Then came forced deployments. Police detectives and traffic officers were summoned for temporary duty.
Some never returned to their original posts. Others came back changed. The rumor spread faster than any official order. Join the army voluntarily or be sent anyway. The exodus accelerated. By mid-2025, entire precincts ran on skeleton crews. In the eastern Urals and parts of the North Caucasus, vacancy rates crossed 50%. In smaller towns, only one officer covered an area once handled by 10. Night shifts vanished, desk work piled up, emergency calls stacked unanswered. That was the first mini-climax. The second arrived with the veterans. Hundreds of thousands rotated back from the front since 2022. Many returned with combat experience and unresolved trauma. Bars filled, arguments escalated. Local media in Rostov and Novosibirsk reported spikes in violent disputes involving former soldiers, often armed, often intoxicated. The police presence meant to defuse these moments was absent or overwhelmed. A twist followed. The Kremlin responded not by rebuilding standards, but by lowering them. Background checks shortened, psychological screening diluted. Recruiters were told to prioritize speed. As long as a uniform fit and a weapon could be carried, the threshold was met. Interior Ministry guidelines from late 2025 reflected this shift. The effect was explosive. Citizens no longer trusted the knock on the door. Criminal records blended with badges. Authority blurred. Fear multiplied. The third shock came when informal groups filled the vacuum. Neighborhood patrols formed. Former soldiers organized protection units. Some answered to local businessmen, others to nobody at all. Jamestown Foundation field reports described towns where unofficial militias handled disputes, collected fees, and enforced curfews. The state watched, unable or unwilling to intervene. Each development fed the next. Fewer police led to more chaos. More chaos drove more resignations. The spiral tightened. By late 2025, the crisis crossed a psychological threshold. Citizens stopped calling the police altogether, not out of defiance, out of calculation. Help rarely came. When it did, it often made things worse. Bribes replaced reports. Silence replaced trust. This was no longer a law and order problem. It was a systems failure. A sequence of decisions, each rational in isolation, combined into a chain reaction. And as that reaction built speed, one question echoed across Russia's cities and provinces alike. If the state cannot control its own streets, what else is slipping away? The strategic impact of this collapse extends far beyond street crime. It strikes at the core pillars of Russia's economy, society, and military readiness. Analysts at Reuters and DW have repeatedly warned through 2025 that internal security erosion amplifies every other weakness inside a wartime state. Russia now offers a live case study. Economically, the damage is immediate. Businesses factor security into cost. When police presence fades, insurance premiums rise or disappear altogether. Small retailers in regional cities shut earlier. Logistics firms reroute convoys. According to estimates cited by the Moscow Times and referenced in Interior Ministry briefings, commercial losses tied to theft, extortion, and vandalism in understaffed regions reached tens of billions of rubles in 2025 alone. That figure compounds an economy already strained by sanctions, defense spending, and inflation. Socially, the consequences cut deeper. The social contract, taxes exchanged for protection, fractures. Surveys conducted by independent Russian sociologists and reported by Zona Media show rising fear not of criminals, but of uniformed men themselves. Trust metrics in local authorities drop to record lows. When citizens avoid reporting crimes, parallel justice systems emerge. Neighborhood enforcement replaces law. Revenge replaces procedure. History shows this pattern rarely reverses without shock. Militarily, the irony is stark. The same war meant to project strength drains internal resilience. Defense News and Janes note that Russia maintains hundreds of thousands of troops under arms, yet struggles to secure its own rear areas. Police officers redeployed to occupied territories leave home regions exposed. Veterans return without reintegration frameworks. The result is a diffusion of military capability into civilian space, unstructured and unpredictable.
Numbers underline the imbalance. Russia's GDP in 2025 is estimated around $1.9 trillion, yet defense and security spending consumes a historically high share. At the same time, Interior Ministry staffing gaps exceed 40% nationwide, with some regions approaching 90% vacancies. Money flows to missiles and armor. Order on the street relies on improvisation. The Kremlin's response leans towards substitution, FSB units, National Guard deployments, army patrols. But these forces train for suppression, not mediation. BBC and Reuters reporting highlight a mismatch. Soldiers escalate situations civilians expect to be calmed. Each intervention risks collateral damage to legitimacy. Strategically, this weakens deterrence at home. A state perceived as unable to control internal space invites challenges from below. Local power brokers, criminal networks, regional strongmen. Once entrenched, these actors resist central authority even when resources return. In strategic terms, Russia now faces a three-front dilemma: sustain the war abroad, stabilize the economy, reassert internal order. Resources suffice for two, not all three. And as internal security erodes, the cost of every other priority rises. This is the hidden front of the war: quiet, relentless, and potentially decisive. The consequences of Russia's internal security collapse do not stop at its borders. They ripple outward, shaping calculations in NATO capitals, European markets, and strategic planning rooms from Washington to Beijing. For NATO, the situation presents a paradox. On one hand, Russia's weakened internal control suggests reduced capacity for sustained external pressure. On the other, instability inside a nuclear-armed state raises red flags. Defense News and Janes have both noted through late 2025 that internal disorder increases reliance on strategic signaling. When control on the ground weakens, regimes compensate with louder threats from the top. This pattern forces NATO planners to prepare for volatility, not just conventional escalation. European Union states feel the effects through migration and energy security. DW reports that as law enforcement thins in Russia's border regions, smuggling networks expand. Weapons, fuel, and people move more freely. Any surge in instability risks pushing refugees westward, not from front lines, but from collapsing regional governance. Energy infrastructure guarded by federal agencies remains prioritized. Neighborhood safety does not. The United States watches through a different lens. With Donald Trump again in the White House, Washington's focus emphasizes cost-benefit realism. Analysts quoted by Reuters argue that a Russia struggling to police itself is less predictable, not less dangerous. The risk shifts from large-scale offensives to fragmented actors operating with military hardware outside strict command structures. For US strategists, that scenario complicates deterrence models built around centralized decision-making. China views the moment pragmatically. Stability matters more than ideology. Beijing's investments across Eurasia depend on predictable transit corridors. An internally unstable Russia becomes a less reliable partner. Chinese policy journals cited by the BBC suggest concern over spillover effects into Central Asia, where security vacuums historically invite competition. Then there is the military doctrine comparison driving global debate: cheap drones versus costly jets, decentralized violence versus centralized control. Russia's war economy normalized mass production of low-cost weapons. Now those tools bleed back into civilian life. Experts warn that once militarization seeps inward, reversing the flow proves difficult. Looking 3 to 6 months ahead, analysts outline stark scenarios. Best case, emergency funding stabilizes police recruitment, standards partially return, and informal militias dissolve. Middle case, patchwork control persists, with federal forces rotating through hotspots. Worst case, internal fragmentation deepens, empowering regional actors and eroding Moscow's authority further. In all scenarios, one reality holds: global actors must factor Russia's internal condition into every calculation, not as background noise, as a central variable. Because a state struggling to control its streets cannot easily predict its own next move. The picture that emerges is unsettling in its clarity. Russia's internal security system is not bending. It is thinning, fragmenting, and in some regions, vanishing. A state built on the promise of order now struggles to provide it where citizens feel it most: outside their doors, after dark, when authority matters. The chain of events is clear. A prolonged war diverts money, manpower, and attention. Police salaries stagnate as inflation rises. Forced deployments shatter trust. Resignations accelerate. Standards fall.
Informal power fills the gaps. Interior Ministry data and independent field reports through late 2025 confirm vacancy rates above 40% nationwide and near total depletion in some districts. This is not rumor, it is arithmetic.
Strategically, the shock lies in the contradiction. Russia projects resilience abroad while absorbing instability at home. The very tools meant to secure victory, mass mobilization, militarized policing, cheap weapons, feed internal disorder when returned to civilian space. The result is a feedback loop that undermines legitimacy faster than any external pressure. Globally, this forces recalculation. NATO planners hedge against volatility. European states prepare for spillover risks. The United States weighs unpredictability under centralized leadership strained by decentralized realities. China watches for disruptions along its economic corridors. Everyone sees the same warning sign. Internal cohesion matters more than rhetoric. For ordinary Russians, the implications are immediate. When people stop calling the police, the social contract has already cracked. When unofficial groups patrol neighborhoods, the state's monopoly on force is no longer absolute. History suggests such moments define trajectories for years, not weeks. So the questions now loom, unanswered and urgent. Can the Kremlin rebuild internal order without pulling resources from the war? Can professional standards return fast enough to restore trust? Or will patchwork control harden into permanent fragmentation? And the largest question of all remains open. If stability was the regime's core promise, what happens when that promise can no longer be delivered? Share your thoughts below. Join the discussion. Subscribe for deeper analysis as this story continues to unfold.